Hello students, I'm back with an explanation of another poem by P.B. Shelley, Ode to Skylark. In the previous video, we have seen what an ode is and the type of odes too. So I am not getting into that details today. We are just going into the poet and the explanation of the poem. So let me share the slides with you. Okay. So have a look at the bird. This is a bird that he is addressing to. You know, ode always addresses a object or a thing or a person, whatever. But here the poet is addressing to another singing bird called Skylark. In Keats' ode, we saw that he was addressing to a small bird called Nightingale, right? Here he is looking at the Skylark and is inspired to write the poem Ode to Skylark, Ode to a Skylark. This is a bird. And you shouldn't confuse which ode was written by whom, because both the odes comes in the same unit. You have to remember that S, Shelley stand for Skylark. So Shelley's ode is Ode to Skylark, whereas Keats' ode is Ode to Nightingale. This is a small tip to remember and not to confuse. So now we come to the biographical details of Percy Bysshe Shelley. That is his full name. P.B. Shelley stands for Percy Bysshe Shelley. He is one of the major English romantic poets, one of the greatest lyric and philosophical poets in the English language. And he was born on 4th August 1792. And he was a key member of a group of visionary poets that included Byron and John Keats. And he was very radical in his ideologies and philosophies. And that may be the reason, though he has written constantly, frequently he writes, had written throughout his living period, but publishers and the journal, they were hesitant in publishing his poetry because they were afraid of being charged with blasphemy or sedition, been punished for blasphemy or sedition. So they were very declined. They declined the publishing the poems of Shelley. But later on, when he died, he became very famous. After his death, he became very famous and one of the poets who cannot be dispensed with when we are talking about English literature. And not only his poetry, but his political ideologies were highly inspiring. And you would have studied about the Chartist movement in social history of England. In the first semester, you would have studied a movement called Chartist movement. And many of the, ideologies were from that of his philosophies. Shelley has inspired the Chartist movement, says the critics. And not only with this historical event, he has also influenced great thinkers and philosophers like Karl Marx and Leo Tolstoy, and even Gandhiji's ideology of non-violence was in kind of an inspiration that he took from Shelley. That's what the critics say. And in the American civil rights movement also, it takes its crux from the radical political ideologies of Shelley. So his philosophies and the greatness of his thoughts did not stop with his death. It had its influence across the continent, and where the basics for forming many of the radical ideologies of the world that could be understood from this brief biography of Shelley. As I told you, Shelley did not attain fame during his lifetime. It was only after his death. He was towards the end of his 29th age, he died. Almost the 30th birthday, he did not see to. So he died by the end of his 29th age. Like Keats. Keats and Shelley, they share many resemblances. And Shelley was one of the ardent fan of Keats. And when his body, he was killed by drowning. When his boat capsized, he drowned. And that was the cause of his death. And when his body was restored, two things were restored from his pockets. One was a complete verse of Keats, and another one was the Bible. So that speaks about how much he loved the poems of Keats. Even while traveling, he used to carry the poems, complete works of the poems of Keats. So this is in brief about the poet. Now we go into the poem, Ode to a Skylark. So it was written in June 1820 and it was published along with his other drama, Prometheus Unbound. Now, when you think about Keats, there are several works that comes to your mind, several works that come to your mind, and one was his Prometheus Unbound. Ozymandias is another poem that comes to your mind, and then there is also a poetry, Ode to the West Wind. Again, a very famous poem of Shelley. And this particular poem was published along with Prometheus Unbound, and it was inspired. Keats was inspired while taking a walk along the forest near the village Livorno in Italy, along with his wife. He was making a walk stroll along with his wife Mary Shelley in the village called Livorno in Italy, where he happened to listen to the song of the skylark, which inspired him to write his poetry. And talking about that, his wife talks that in the spring, I quote, in the spring we spent a week near Livorno. It was a beautiful summer evening. And wandering among the lanes whose myrtle hedges were the bowers of the fireflies, that we heard the caroling of the skylark. So Mary Shelley acknowledges what was the inspiration for Shelley to write this ode. While they were walking along, they heard the song of the skylark, and immediately he was inspired by the song and he started writing the poem. That's how even his wife is the reason behind writing. Now we will go into the poem. I told you this is a lengthy poem. The poem runs to 21 stanzas. Each stanza has 5 lines. And though a very long poem, they're very simple. It's easy to understand. Let's get into the poem. Stanza 1. Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert, that from heaven or near it pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. I have already told you in the while discussing about the poem of Keats, the ode of Keats, that ode usually addresses something. So here the poet is addressing the bird skylark and praises it. Hail to thee. He praises the spirit, blithe spirit, always happy, the spirit. Bird thou never wert. So he calls it the bird not as a bird but a spirit, as a heavenly being. So he looks at the bird not as a mere bird but a spirit from heaven, that from heaven or near it pours thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. Why is he calling it a skylark? Because it is above the sky, it is flying in the sky, and from there it is pouring his full heart. Full heart means full throated song, high volumed and a very happy strain of music that it is giving from heaven. And the beauty of it is that it is a strain of unpremeditated art. It is not something already planned. It sings so spontaneously. That is the beauty of the song. You have to remember that nobody has urged the bird to sing. It sings on its own in full throated volume in a very unpremeditated, designed song. It comes all on its own, a spontaneous song that it sings. So it is praising. Shelley is praising the bird for this unpremeditated, full-throated, energetic, happy song that comes from heaven. So it cannot be an ordinary bird. According to him, it is a spirit. Right? Then we move to the second stanza. Higher still and higher, from the earth thou springest like a cloud of fire. The blue deep thou wingest, and singing still does soar, and soaring ever singest. The beauty of the poem is in every line you find a simile or a metaphor. In the first stanza, the poet is comparing the poet, or calling, metaphorically calling the poet, the bird as a spirit. See, the same way in the second stanza, he is calling it as a cloud of fire, a simile, like a cloud of fire. Higher still and higher, from the earth thou springest. So he is describing the flight of the bird. It is flying from earth towards the sky, and it is going higher and higher like a cloud of fire. How does it go? It goes like a cloud of fire. Like a fire, it travels very fast into the heaven. The blue deep thou wingest. So blue deep stands for the sky. Along the sky thou wingest. Thou means you fly, and singing still does soar, and soaring ever singest. So two things are done simultaneously by the bird. The bird is flying as well as singing. Soaring, flying as well as singing. So both the things are happening simultaneously, and the bird's flying and soaring high has been compared to that of a cloud of fire. So I repeat, in the first stanza, the bird has been compared to that of a spirit, or called that of a spirit. In the second stanza, you find the bird being called as the cloud of fire. Now we move to the third stanza. In the golden lightning of the sunken sun, over which clouds are brightening, thou dost float and run like an unbodied joy whose race is just begun. Another comparison is here. In the golden lightning of the sunken sun. The golden lightning, he's talking about the sun is about to set, maybe sinking sun, over which clouds are brightening. So it's not at darkness, the sun is still there and the clouds are very bright, and along that clouds, thou means you, nightingale, does float and run. You are floating and running means flying. Sometimes the bird, you would have seen that it would keep its wings steady and it would be floating along the sky, and sometimes you are flying like an unbodied joy. That's a comparison in this stanza. The bird has been compared to that of joy being turned into a bird form. Just like we call personification, no? When nothing has been personified or imaged as a human being, we call it personification. But here, joy has been imaged as that of the bird. It had been embodied in the form of a bird. So it has been compared to that of a joy unbodied joy. Joy is an abstract thing, but here you find joy being in the form of a nightingale, skylark. I'm sorry, skylark. Don't confuse. Skylark is the bird that Shelley is addressing to. So he calls this bird as an unbodied joy, joy that has no body, whose race is just begun. You know, the bird is flying as if it had just started its journey. In other words, what does he mean? He tries to tell that the energy of the bird is so much that it doesn't feel any kind of tiredness, and it is flying in a rapid rate as if the flying race was just started. So I repeat, in the third stanza, comparison is to that of joy being given the form of nightingale. In the fourth stanza, we continue to read, the pale purple even melts around thy flight like a star of heaven. Underline this. This is another comparison. Star of heaven is the comparison that you find in stanza 4. In the broad daylight, thou art unseen, but yet I hear thy shrill delight. So he's talking about the pale purple even melts around thy flight. You know, as you go higher and higher, you seem to melt along the sky. I'm not able to see you anymore. Right? You seem to melt along the purple sky, the sky that reflects and refracts different colors. Now the sky looks pale purple, and you're not to be seen. You're just melting into that like a star of heaven, like a star. You know, stars would be there all the time. Every time you can find the stars. I mean, you know that the stars are there. Science says the stars are always there, but you can see the stars only during the absence of sunlight. Right? But we know that it is there. Likewise, the bird, as it goes higher and higher, it can't be seen. But he can feel its presence. How? Through the song that it sings. The poet says, oh, he's not, his eyes are unable to see the bird or locate the bird flying in the sky like the stars that are not seen during the daytime. That's a comparison. The what? Unseen. I am not able to see you, but I hear thy shrill delight. Shrill delight, I can still hear your happy song. So what the poet is trying to say in the third stanza is that he is not able to see the bird because of too much of brightness of the sun. Like the stars that cannot be seen during the daytime, the poet is not able to see the bird in the present, but still he could feel, as the stars could be known to be there all the time, he could also feel that the nightingale is there in the sky by listening to the sweet song of the nightingale. So in the third stanza, the bird has been compared to that of an unbodied joy. Fourth stanza, the bird is compared to that of the star of the heaven, like the stars. Hope you understood. We're moving to the next stanza, stanza 5. Keen as are the arrows on the silver of that silver sphere, whose intense lamps narrows in the white dawn clear, until we hardly see, we feel that it is there. So the similar thing is being compared here. He's not able to see. That is what he is telling. And keen as the arrows, you are as sharp as the arrows. Your flight is very steady and sharp like the arrow. So that was a comparison of the silver sphere. Silver sphere is a reference to the moon, whose intense lamp narrows in the white dawn clear. Until we hardly see, we feel that it is there. Once again, here it is compared to that of the moon. The arrow stands for the rays of the moon that comes from. In the night, you can see the moon and its light rays very clearly. But when it nears the daylight, what happens? It narrows down or it goes down until we hardly see. When the morning light comes, when the sun comes, you cannot see the moon. But still we know the moon is there. Right? Likewise, he says that we can hardly see you now. As you are going up in the broad daylight, I'm not able to see you, but still like the moon whose rays are always there, I could feel thy presence in the sky. So moon is the comparison that you find here. Sixth stanza, all the earth and air with thy voice is loved, as when night is bare from one lonely cloud, the moon rains out her beams and heaven is overflowed. Same comparison being extended. The bird's song has been compared to that of the rays that comes from the moon. All the earth and air with thy voice is loved. You know, you fill the earth and air. You fill the entire universe with the beautiful voice, that loud, the very loud voice of yes. As when night is bare from one lonely cloud, the moon rains out her beam. Just like the entire world is lighted from one cloud. Which is the cloud? The moon. Just like the moon lightens the entire world, you enlighten the whole world with your single song, and heaven is overflowed. Heaven, sky is overflowed with your song. So in the sixth stanza also, the bird is compared to that of the moon. Just like one moon fills the entire world, the sky as well as the earth with the rays of moon, the one bird, skylark, is filling the entire earth and heaven with the music of it. That's a comparison. Now moving to the seventh stanza. What thou art, we know not. So he is coming to understand what kind of a bird it is. So he is telling it. Actually, all these are addressed to the skylark. As I have mentioned in the beginning of the poem, he is addressing everything to skylark, and he is asking, what thou art, we know not. What is most like thee? From rainbow clouds there flow not drops so bright to see, as from thy presence showers a rain of melody. Again, the comparison is that of rain. So he says that what you are, I am not able to understand. What makes you sing so much, also I do not know. You're somebody great. And just like from the rainbow clouds, from the rainy clouds, from the water-filled clouds, the drops are falling. The raindrops would have seen it is so bright and it is so shiny. The sparkling raindrops fall from the cloud, the rainy clouds. And the comparison is that, but you are even more brighter than that of those raindrops. And your song is so spontaneous and beautiful and loud than that of the raindrops that comes from the rainbow clouds. So again, the comparison is to that of the rain. The birds sings forth songs which are more melodious and more beautiful than that of the raindrop that comes from heaven. It's a comparison. Hope it is clear. If you have any doubt, we will clear it in the live class. Don't worry. So here the skylark is compared to that of the raindrops. Now going to the eighth stanza, like a poet hidden. The next comparison is skylark being compared to that of the poet who is hidden behind his words. Poet hidden in the light of thought, singing hymns unbidden, till the world is fraught to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. So the allusion is to that of a poet who writes. Nobody can compel a poet to write. He should feel the urge to write. And you do not see the poet's face in the poetry. Right? Do you see Shelley in the poems? No, we only come to know about his thoughts, right? Like a poet is hidden behind his lines. Like so, this Nightingale is like a poet who is hidden behind his thought, his ideas, singing hymns unbidden, hymns, music unbidden, without even asked for. A poet writes on his own, without anybody to request for, unbidden, till the world is fraught with sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not, till he moves the reader's heart with hope and sympathy. See, poetry is a fine form of art. It's an art form that moves the one who reads it, that makes one enjoy the different emotions. And fears it heeded not. He says a true poet is not at all worried about the consequences or how the poetry is received by the audience. He writes to move the world with different emotion, and it is an unbidden art. Nobody asks him, and he is not writing for anyone else. It's a feeling that it feels intensely. So Nightingale is also singing its song without the request of anyone. It sings for itself. It is moving the listeners. Just like a poet moves the listeners with sympathy and hope, Nightingale's song is also moving the one who listens to it, like the poet Shelley. Shelley is moved, right? Likewise, the poetry of the music of Skylark is also very moving, like the poetry. You cannot see the nightingale. Once again, he continues with the thought that he is not able to locate the bird on the sky, right? But he is able to hear it. And this unseen quality of the nightingale is compared to that of the poet who hides behind the thought or the lines of his poetry. Okay. Stanza 9. Like a high-born maiden. Another comparison. From poet, he moves to a high-born maiden, like a princess. In a palace tower, soothing her love-laden soul in secret hour with music sweet as love which overflows her bower. So maybe the princess has been locked inside her room because of the love that is known to the parents. She has been locked. So this nightingale is like a high-born maiden in a palace tower. She's been locked in her room, soothing her, giving kind of a comfort to her love-laden heart. She was in love. Maybe she is in love and her heart is heavy with that love. And how does she give solace to her heart? By singing a sweet love song, which overflows her bower. Bower maybe overflows her room or her bower of her heart. So here the song of the nightingale is so lovely and so romantic, like that of a young maiden who had been locked up in a room. She has nothing to do but to give vent to her feelings by singing some romantic song. So Nightingale's heart is also filled with this feeling of love, like a maiden or the princess. The comparison is that. When we move to the 10th stanza, there is another comparison on your way, like a glowworm golden. Underline that. This is a comparison. Nightingale is compared to that of a glowworm in a dell of dew. It is there in a dell of dew, scattering unbeholden in aerial hue among the flowers and grass which screen it from the view. You would have seen that glowworm being hidden by the grass and the small bushes. Right? When you remove that only, you can see a cluster of them there. But you still feel its presence by the small light, that the glow that it emanates. We can understand that it is there. So the nightingale is like that of the glowworm, which is not visible. It is in a dell or a small valley. It is dell means a valley of dew, valley where the dew drops fall down, and you could see that beneath the grass or between the leaves. We know its presence by the glow it emits. You cannot see the worm, but only the glow you can see. Likewise, you cannot see the skylark flying, but the song is heard. Just like the glow of the worm could be sensed, the song of the skylark could be heard. The song of the skylark could be heard, just like the glowworm scattering unbeholden, unbeholden without anyone's asking. Does the glowworm give the light by someone's asking? No, it does this so naturally. Like that, the nightingale also sings so naturally, like that of the glowworm. So the comparison is that. 11th stanza, like a rose empowered in its own green leaves, by warm winds deflowered, till the scent it gives makes faint with too much sweet those heavy winged thieves. Another beautiful imagery that you find here is that the skylark is that of a rose. You know, most of the time the roses, they bloom inside a group of cluster of leaves. No, you cannot see, but by the sweet smell of the rose only, you come to know that a rose has bloomed that day. So it has been compared to the rose empowered in its own green leaves. It is covered with its own green leaves by warm winds deflowered. What happened? It cannot remain hidden. The rose cannot remain hidden for a long time. When a wind comes and blows, what happens? The sweet scent it carries along. It makes a faint with too much sweet, those heavy winged thieves. The heavy winged thieves can be two things. Either it can be the wind that takes away the sweet odor of the rose, or it can be the butterfly which carries the honey of the rose. So the comparison is here. The nightingale is like that of a rose that is hidden. I'm sorry, not nightingale, ma. Don't confuse. I'm sorry that I wrongly mentioned it. It is the skylark. The skylark is not to be seen, like a rose that is not seen and covered by the leaves. Just like the wind carries the odor of or the sweet smell of the rose, the presence of the rose is felt by the sweet smell that the wind carries it along, or the butterfly carries along the honey. Likewise, the song of the skylark makes it clear that it is still there in the sky. I repeat, the sweet smell of the rose reveals that it is hidden beneath the leaves. The sweet song of the skylark reveals that it is there in the sky. So the comparison here is to that of a hidden rose. 12th stanza, sound of vernal showers on the twinkling grass, rain awakened flowers, all that ever was joyous and clear and fresh, their music doth surpass. So he is talking about number of things that the nightingale's sweet song surpass. Surpass, it throws away. It wins over. You know, it is incomparable. It surpasses. It overcomes all the other sweet things. What are the things? Sound of vernal showers. Vernal showers. Vernal means the heavenly. Showers refer to rain. So when the rain falls down, you hear a kind of a rhythmic sound of the rain falling. So on the twinkling grass. What happens when the raindrop falls on the grass? It twinkles. It shines. So it's a beautiful sight to see. Especially in the morning, you could see the grass twinkling with the dewdrops or the raindrops that you can see. So the sound of the vernal shower, the rain on the twinkling grass, or rain awakened flowers. When rain falls over the trees, plants, and the flowers, they bloom forth with all new life. All that ever was joyous, clear, and fresh. So all these sights, rain falling, the sound of the rain falling, and the beauty of the grass shining, and the what the flowers being reawakened, coming back to life after the rain. Everything is so beautiful, and it fills your heart with joy and makes you feel very fresh. But the music of Nightingale surpasses it, passes over everything, and it is much more potent, much more beautiful, much more lovely, and it influences you much more than that of the rain or the beauty of the things in nature. So Nightingale surpasses everything else in the nature. So several things are being compared with that of the beauty of Nightingale's song. Rain, the droplets on the grass, and the beautiful flowers that come back to life when the rain falls. When we move to 13th stanza, we find the bird asking the bird for the favor. Teachers, sprite or bird, what sweet thoughts are thine? I have never heard praise of love or wine that panted forth the flood of rapture, so divine. So he's asking teachers, sprite or bird, whether you are a bird or a spirit, I do not know. Till now I am in a confusion whether you are a bird or a sprite. But what makes you so sweet? How do you get these sweet thoughts? I have never heard praise of love or wine that panted forth a flood of rapture so divine. What is giving you this kind of joy? Is it the love that you got, or the wine, the thing that inspires the voice? Hope you remember how Keats is asking for a beaker of wine, right, from the Provencal region. So he says, is it a what inspires you to come out with such a beautiful song? Is it love in your heart, or the wine that you have rendered that produces such a rapture, such a divine rapture, musical melody? So he's asking the reason or the cause of his joy, which makes it sing such a beautiful, lovely song. Hope you understood. Here he's asking, from comparison, he's directly asking what is the thing that makes it extremely happy to sing such a happy song? Is it the wine that it has drunken, or the love that it had experienced in his heart? 14th stanza, chorus hymnal or triumphal chant, matched with thine would be all but an empty want, a thing wherein we feel there is some hidden want. So he's asking, your song is so hymnal, so peaceful, like that of a religious song, or a triumphant chant. No, triumphant chant after the victory in every war, they used to beat the trumpet and produce some kind of music, a very energetic, very strong music. And he's making a comparison with these two. Your song is so soothing, more soothing than that of a hymn, a religious song, and more powerful and vigorous and strong than that of the chorus song. And when compared to your song, they are empty one. They cannot stand. They are baseless. They cannot stand anywhere near your song. They are an empty want, a thing wherein we feel there is some hidden want. So we find that the other musical songs like the hymn or the victory song, they lack something when we listen to your song, which is full of energy and full of joy, full of soft feelings. So your song is incomparable. It cannot be compared with anything else because they all lack something, whereas yours is a perfect song. Now, what objects are the fountains of their happy strain? Continuing with that, what makes you happy? What fields or waves or mountains? What shapes of sky or plain? What love of thine own kind? What ignorance of pain? So, what are the things that inspire you? What are the things he's listing down? What are the objects? Are the fountains of their happy strain? From where do you get your inspiration? Do you remember the fountain where the muses assemble? The muses who inspire the poets to write poetry. So he's asking which fountain is inspiring you? Or what field, which happy field makes you sing this song? Or what waves, what sea, what mountain, what sky, what plain? What is the part of nature, of which aspect of the nature inspire you to have this kind of intensity with which you sing? Do you have a love? Human love, it always fades away after some time. But your love seems to be very constant. What had given you this? Is it the ignorance of pain? Does it mean that you do not know pain just like the human beings are? So you find here the poet comparing the troublesome human life with that of the trouble-free life of the skylark. It is very happy, and he wants to know the source of that happiness so that he can be also happy. He was also undergoing a kind of a turmoil because of the political conditions of that time and the lack of reception he's getting from his critics. So his heart is also troublesome and pain. So he's asking what is the factor that makes the bird so ignorant of pain. That is the meaning of that stanza, the summary of the stanza. What are the things that inspire the bird to sing such a beautiful song? With thy clear, keen joyance, languor cannot be, shadow of annoyance never came near thee. Thou lovest, but never knew love's sad satiety. Once again, the comparison is with that of the human being with clear, keen joyance. I could very easily feel that clear joy, the very, what do you say, that joy that is not in any way tinged with any kind of sadness. It's a complete joy, rapture that I find in you. And I see that maybe the reason why you are never lazy, languor, you are not tired at all. Why? Because of the endless love that you have in your heart. And there is no shadow of annoyance. You were never annoyed. You were never restless with the continuous singing. Shadow of annoyance was never near you. You could never come near this quality of annoyance. Thou lovers, but never knew love sad satiety. No, love for the human beings is very transient. It lives for some time. And he compares that with that of the very everlasting love of the bird, which never gets satiated. It never feels satisfied with the love. It wants more and more, and it is getting the love constantly, whereas the human beings are soon fed up with that of the love that they receive. Love always ends in a kind of sadness, whereas in the Skylark's life, there is no sad satiety of the loved experience. And he thinks this may be the reason why the bird is singing this tireless song. 17th stanza. It's a pretty long poem, I know, but still we have to finish it up. So we move to the 17th stanza. Waking or asleep, thou of death must deem things more true and deep than we mortals dream. How could thy notes flow in such a crystal stream? So he is trying to keep on imagining about the perceptive quality of the how the Skylark perceive things. You know, waking or asleep, whether you are asleep or you are waking, thou of death must deem things more true and deep. You know that death is something inevitable. We all know, mortals know that we will be dying some other day, and it is something true and deep. So we think about that. Whenever we live, we are just tormented by the thought that death is going to be inevitable and it is very soon to arrive. Right? So you all maybe about you also know that death is something inevitable, but you are not at all troubled by the thought of death. Otherwise, how could you, sing in such a crystal stream? You are never worried or swayed by the thoughts of death as human beings are. Again, the comparison is with that other human being who are always pestered or troubled by the thoughts of death. Whereas the Skylark is never bothered about it. It accepts it as a reality, and maybe that is the reason why it could sing a crystal clear without any wavering, very clear and a very harmonious song it could produce because it is unwavered in its life about the thought of death. In waking as well as in flying, it knows that death is going to be there, but it is not wavered by the thought. That is the reason why it could sing crystal clear songs. And once again, the thought gets continued here, and he is making comparison of the human life. We look before and after and find for what is not. This is a beautiful thought of Shelley, which is very true. Right? Human beings are always worried about the past and the future. We look before and after. We are either worried about the past or we are worried about the future. We are anxious about the future and pine for what is not. We never look at what we have, but we always worry about things we do not have. A sincerest laughter with some pain is what even when you laugh heartily, there is a tinge of sadness. You know, when people laugh too much, they used to say, don't laugh too much because you would be crying. So that cry is a factor, or sadness is a factor you always associate even in the mood of highest happiness. So even our sincere laughter is tinged with the streak of pain. That is what the poet is mentioning here. And this is a very often most often quoted line. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Only sad songs. This is very true. You know, even the movie songs you remember most of the time. The songs that find a very permanent place in your heart would be that of the sad songs. The love failure songs are the very pathetic songs that finds a long time in your memory than the peppy songs. When you're in a good mood, you listen to the peppy song and you forget. But the sad songs are the songs that will have an everlasting memory in your heart because human being by nature, they're always colored with or they always worry about something sad that is going to happen. Even when they laugh, there is a feeling of a hidden feeling of sadness in them. And it is so much unlike that of the skylark. It is all the time happy. Whereas a man is always worried about the past and the future, and he longs for always something that he doesn't have. He doesn't have. So always pain is a constant companion of human being, whereas the bird skylark is pain free. 19th stanza. Yet, if we could scorn hate and pride and fear, if we with things want not to shed a tear, I know not how their joy we ever should come near. So he's making a kind of thinking. Okay, maybe we cannot reach anywhere near you, but if at all, we could scorn, we could give away feelings like hatred, pride, and fear. If we are not proud, if you are not afraid, and if you don't hate somebody, maybe we were things born not to shed a tear. If we could follow this, then maybe you may not feel like shedding tears, or we may not cry. I know not how thy joy we ever should come near. Even if we do that, he is doubtful actually. To some extent, you can experience a kind of a joy, and you can shed less tears if you could get away these feelings, hatred, pride, and fear. If you keep them away from you, of course, to some extent you can be happy, but still he is doubtful whether it would anyway come near that of the bird skylark. In other words, he feels that happiness that the bird experiences is unsurpassed. It cannot be surpassed, right? The last two stanzas. Luckily, we have come to the end of the poem. Teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know. Such harmonious madness from my lips would flow. The world should listen then as I am listening now. Usually, the end of the ode of Shelley would be like this. In West Wind also, he's asking, teach me to forget the worries. Lift me as a wave, like that he talks in the end of the poem, Ode to the West Wind. So here is also a poem where he's making an appeal to the nightingale, asking it to teach him half the gladness. Teach me half your happiness. I don't want the entire happiness. If at least you could give me half your gladness, that thy brain must know, that your brain knows, your heart knows. Such harmonious madness from my lips would flow. The world should listen then as I am listening now. What is he? Why is he asking for that happiness, half the happiness, so that he can write poetry that will be so spontaneous and musical and lovable as that of the nightingale. So he could sing poetry that would flow and the world should listen. So indirectly, he is referring to the criticism that his poetry is inviting, not a positive criticism. So he wishes to write poetry that would be accepted by the world, just like everyone is listening to the nightingale and feeling elated. He wants to write a poem that would be welcomed like that of the nightingale. Just like he is listening so much absorbed in the song of the skylark, he wants his poetry also to capture the attention of the world. It is for this sake that he is asking for half the happiness of the bird skylark. Continuing, concluding stanza. Better than all measures of delightful sound, better than all treasures that in books are found, thy skill to poet where thou's corner of the ground. So he says that no one can learn better from any of the books. Any song or any book cannot teach him better than the sound of the nightingale, the music of the skylark, right? Better than all measures of delightful sound, better than any song, better than all treasures, better than all wealth that you could find in the books. Books are the treasure houses, storehouses of wisdom. But more than that, thy skill to poet where those corner of the ground. So the poet can get inspired more by listening to your song, by experiencing your joy, than by reading the books or listening to any other song. Thou's corner of the ground. Thou, one who despises the sadness or the triviality of the humankind. So skylark is free from all the human miseries, all the trifle things that the human beings are suffering from. So he is asking the bird skylark to teach him half the gladness so that he could find poetry, write poetry that would be welcomed by everyone as he is welcoming the song of the nightingale, so that he could get more knowledge than he could find in any of the books. So this bird is said to be much more powerful and inspiring than that of any books or any song. So he's all in praise for the bird skylark. So this is about the poem where we find skylark being compared to different images, and finally he's asking the bird to inspire him, give him the quality which will make him a better poet. So this is something that he's asking for. He wants to write better poems. He wants to be acknowledged as better poet. That craving gets reflected in the poem. So when you come to the themes of the poem, you find it is the binary world has been set. It is a comparison between man and the natural world. Man is always worried over something, whereas the things in nature, like the bird, skylark, is always enjoying. So the beauty of art and culture is also described. Art and culture is always permanent. The love in the life of the nature is always permanent, whereas you find the love in the human life is fading. Sadness and happiness. Human beings are always pining with some kind of a sadness, whereas things in nature, including that of skylark, are always happy and they are overflowing with that of gladness. Then awe and amazement, his feeling of surprise and his feeling of awe, or how he has been taken aback by the beauty of things that he sees in nature. These are the prominent themes that could be seen in the poem. Overall, the poem is about a man's search for happiness. So, on the whole, here the poet is looking out for the happiness which is missing in his life, and he wants the bird to teach him how to be happy. So, the poet is on the verge of desperation. I told you the reason behind that. Maybe the failure of his career as a poet that makes him so desperate, and he is hoping that maybe by listening to the song he could get better inspiration and he could write better poetry. So can give him some joy like that of the bird. Now when we come to look at the techniques of the poetry, we find that it is a ode. I told you Horatian ode written in 21 stanza, and it has a very constant rhyme scheme, and the rhyme scheme is A B A B B, and it has varying end sounds. And the first 4 lines of the each stanza, it is written in trochaic trimeter. That means every stressed syllable comes before an unstressed. Stress and unstressed, like that the syllable follows. And the 5th longer line of each stanza is written in iambic hexameter. This is about the style. And as I have been telling you, from every stanza there is a simile or a metaphor that you come across. This is rich in simile and metaphor, which add to the poetic quality of the poem. So this is in brief about the poem Ode to Skylark. As I told you, even while I was explaining, I had the habit of replacing Skylark with Nightingale. So you don't do that mistake. Actually, you have to remember it with Shelley. Shelley wrote Ode to a Skylark. And this is a poem which he wrote by being inspired by listening to the song which he heard in a village in Ireland. So this is about it. Hope you understood. I know you might have come across a number of doubts. After watching the video, I request all of you to read the poem. It's a pretty long poem. You can take some time to read the poem from the beginning till the end, and try to find out whether you could understand that. And mark all the doubts that you have regarding any of the lines, any of the comparison or metaphors that you come across. Mark it somewhere, and we shall discuss about it and clear your doubts in the coming Google Meet live class. Hope you understood. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.